Hello and welcome to lesson number 5, Anatomy and Physiology for Exercise at level 2. And what we're looking at today is the structure and function of the circulatory system. So it's the heart and it's the blood vessels, and what the heart and the blood vessels do in the body and what their function is, okay? And we're going to be able to understand that in a lot more depth. And in particular, we're going to be able to look at where exactly the heart is in the body. We're going to be able to describe the function of the heart and also the structure of the heart, so what it's made up of and what the different parts of the heart are and what they do, how blood moves through the 4 different chambers that we have inside the heart. We'll also know about systemic and pulmonary circulation, and we'll be able to be describing the structure and functions of blood vessels, so that's the veins, the arteries and the capillaries too. We'll know what blood pressure is, and we'll also be able to identify high, low, very high, very low blood pressure, so that when we're out there working with our clients, we'll be able to give them guidance and help in terms of their blood pressure and helping them to improve their health. First of all, let's look at what exactly makes up the circulatory system, alright? And circulatory, that word should be triggering thoughts of circles, alright? And that's what it is. It's a big circle that takes our blood around the body. That's what the circulatory system is. And the circulatory system is made up of the heart and our blood. We have arteries, veins and capillaries, and we'll look at exactly what they are in a lot more detail. We have something called the right and left atria, which are parts of the heart, okay? The atria and the ventricles are parts of the heart, and we have a right and left for both. So we have a right atrium, a left atrium, a right ventricle and a left ventricle, okay? And then just below that, in that bullet pointed list just there, we have the pulmonary vein, the pulmonary artery, the aorta and the vena cava. And those 4 there are really the major arteries and veins within the human body that we need to know the names of, and we need to know what they do and where they're going to be bringing blood to or collecting blood from, and what their job is inside the circulatory system. So let's tick off our first thing on the list today. Some of you, I imagine quite a lot of you already know the answer to this. However, the heart, alright? The heart is located in the thoracic cavity, so in the cavity inside the chest. It's inside the rib cage, it's behind the sternum. So the sternum is the really hard bone. I'm going to press it. It's me pressing my sternum. Really hard bone in between the chest, right in the middle of your chest, and it's between the lungs, okay? So if you put your hand on your chest, on the sternum, come slightly left, that's where your heart is. And everyone should know the location of the heart. Alright, so we know where it is. What exactly is the heart and what does it do? So essentially, the heart is a pump. It's a muscular pump, and it pushes blood around our body. It pushes oxygenated blood to the muscles, and it also pushes deoxygenated blood back to the lungs, so that it can go and get some more oxygen. And the whole point of the circulatory system is to move the blood around the body so that the blood can deliver the nutrients and oxygen to the muscles, and that's why we have the heart. And our heart is about the size of a clenched fist. It could be bigger, could be slightly smaller, depending on how you train and genetics, but as a rough guide, it's about the size of a clenched fist. So we know that we're pumping blood around the body, but what exactly is in our blood? We have red blood cells, and red blood cells, they transport oxygen around the body, okay? So when we breathe in, the red blood cells, they collect the oxygen from the lungs and they take it around the body. That's what our red blood cells do. We then have white blood cells, and white blood cells, they fight infection. So if we ever get ill or sick, the job of the white blood cells is to go and fight that infection and get rid of it and take it away and to make us feel better again. We have platelets, And platelets are a little bit disgusting. They're fragments of dead blood. But what they do, they have a really important job, and their job is to clot. So if we ever have a cut, the job of the platelets is to patch up that cut and make sure that we're not losing blood, because if we lose blood, then we can't get oxygen circulated around the body, and that's what platelets do. They go in there and they block up the hole so that the heart and the circulatory system can continue to work. We have plasma, which is the last thing, and plasma is a straw-coloured liquid, and most of it's water, and it also has something called solutes in as well. And we'll look a little bit later on at what solutes are, but it's important to note that the plasma is mostly water, but it does have a small percentage of solutes in there as well. And this is where it's at really for today, okay? This is going to be the most difficult part. Understanding the structure of the heart and how the blood flows through the heart, okay? So if we were to look at the picture on the right, okay, that's an accurate diagram of the heart, and the blue represents deoxygenated blood, and the red represents oxygenated blood. So, and again, this might seem a little confusing, but say we've got right and left, and that might be backwards to you looking at the screen, but if you were to turn around, okay, so that you were behind the screen, then it would be accurate, okay? So this is the way the heart looks in the body. The left side of your heart is the more muscular side, the same as it is on this diagram here. And what we've got atrium at the top, and we've got ventricles at the bottom, alright? And as you can see, I'm just going to circle each area for you, okay? So the right atrium is this bit here, and then the right ventricle comes below it, it's this bit here. You can see there's a valve that takes the blood through there. So, right atrium at the top, right ventricle at the bottom. On the other side, we've got the left atrium at the top, just here, and we have the left ventricle at the bottom, down here. And if you look, all this muscle around the left side, that's the side of the heart that's bigger and stronger, and that's because there's more muscle surrounding that area of the heart, as you can see there. Blood always flows from A to V, so it always goes from the atrium to the ventricles, okay? And an easy way that I find to remember that is if you were to draw a diamond, so an A on top of a V, it's always the A that comes first, and then the V underneath, and that's the way I tend to remember it. Atrium first, ventricle second. Now let's have a little bit of a look at the blood vessels. So now we've got the atriums and the ventricles, and what we want to look at is the veins that we have here, okay? First of all, we have the vena cava at the bottom, and as you can see, the vena cava comes up and it delivers into the right atrium there. Once we go into the right atrium, the blood will pass through to the right ventricle. So from the vena cava, we go right atrium, then right ventricle, and then the blood is pushed out through the pulmonary artery. Okay? So we'll re-sum that up because it's important that we follow this, guys, okay? Coming into the heart, the blood flows through the vena cava. Whether it be the inferior or the superior, the blood flows into the heart through the vena cava. It then goes into the right atrium, and then the right ventricle, and then it exits the right side of the heart through something called the pulmonary artery. Then it returns to the heart through the pulmonary vein. We go through the left atrium, the left ventricle, and we go out through the biggest blood vessel in the body, the strongest blood vessel, which is the aorta. Just going to run you through that one more time, guys, just to make sure it makes absolute sense. I'm going to get rid of these. Go through it one more time. because it is essentially, it can be confusing to remember. So, blood flow comes in through the vena cava. Okay, superior or inferior, it doesn't matter at this level. Blood comes in through the vena cava. It then goes into the right atrium, and then from the atrium passes through to the right ventricle. We then go out of the heart through the pulmonary artery, and we go away, we go to the lungs from there. After we've been to the lungs, we come back to the heart, so we go and collect oxygenated blood from the lungs. Remember, all of the blue is deoxygenated blood, all of the red is oxygenated, and we go in there to the pulmonary vein, through the left atrium, into the left ventricle, and then blood gets pumped out of the heart around to the rest of the body through the aorta. There we go. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look. We've looked at the heart very close up, and what I want to do now is we want to try and look from a perspective where we're looking at the whole body rather than just the heart on its own, and we have the pulmonary and the systemic, which is something that we identified we were going to cover off at the start of the presentation. And the pulmonary, that handles the blood flow between the heart and the lungs, and the systemic, that handles the blood flow between the heart and the body systems. Okay, so the pulmonary, that's going to be looking after, in the most part, blood that's got no oxygen. Okay, the blue part. The systemic, that's going to be looking after the red, and in the most part looking after blood that's been oxygenized and it's ready to be taken around the body to distribute the oxygen to the muscle. Sorry. And just the same as last time, as we looked at, it starts at a slightly different point, but it's still the same process. From the right ventricle, we'll go through the pulmonary artery, okay? And then if we went back, just to show you that again. So from the right ventricle, here, we're going out through the pulmonary artery. Then, from the pulmonary artery, we go to something called the pulmonary arterioles, and then the pulmonary capillaries. And essentially, the arterioles are small, is a smaller version of the artery, and the capillaries are very small blood vessels where diffusion can take place. So where we can get oxygen into the bloodstream, or we can get rid of CO2 out of or carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream. Okay. After that, we'll go to the pulmonary vein, and then we'll come to the left atrium, and that's the whole pulmonary system. So if we went back to look at it again, oh, sorry, gone the wrong way. Let's have a look. Okay, so we know that we're starting here. We're coming in, and we're going out through the pulmonary artery. We go over to the lungs, and we go and get rid of all this carbon dioxide, and we go and collect some brand new fresh oxygen for the blood, and then we come back in through the pulmonary vein. Okay, just there. Everyone clear? Hope so. If not, have a little look, and it should become it should start to make sense again. From there, we go left atrium, left ventricle, and we go through the aorta, which is the big, strong artery. We pump the blood all around the body, and as we go around the body, we go into different arteries and arterioles and capillaries, so that that blood can be distributed to the muscles. And when we come back, so once we have gotten rid of the oxygen, which is happening here, see where it's changing from red to blue? That's us getting rid of the oxygen and giving it to the muscles. And then once we've got rid of it, we turn back blue, and we're coming back to the heart through veins and venules. Venules are just smaller veins. Eventually we get to the vena cava, and we come back to the heart. Have a quick look at that, okay? Should be all that we've covered just, and it should be acting as a little bit of a summary for you. So have a read through that just while I'm talking. And what we should be noticing, and if you need to, you need to put it down in paper and make a diagram so far of what we've covered, please do that. It will definitely be helpful. And make sure you understand it and replay if you need to. Here we go again. Just to reinforce what's happening, guys. We're breathing oxygen in through the nose and the mouth. It's travelling down the windpipe, or the trachea, to give it its correct name, and it's going to the lungs. So we breathe in, and oxygen is taken to the lungs. From the lungs, it's then taken to the heart, and it comes in there through the pulmonary vein and out through the aorta. And when we go to the aorta, we're going round to the rest of the body. That's our oxygen there being distributed all around the body. And once it's used by the muscles, our waste product there is carbon dioxide. We come back to the heart through the vena cava. Okay, we go in the vena cava, takes us through to the right atrium. Blood then passes to the right ventricle, and then we go out through the pulmonary artery to the rest of the body. Sorry, not to the rest of the body. We go back to the heart to collect more oxygenated blood, and we get rid of the CO2. We breathe it out, and then the process starts all over again. All right. And again, if you need to replay that and go through it, please do. Let's have a little bit of a look at the blood vessels in some greater detail. All right. We have the arteries, the veins, and capillaries. And the arteries, they're responsible for looking after that the oxygenated blood, and they take it away from the heart, and they take it to all of our muscles. That our muscles need the oxygen to be able to function. All right. And the arteries have quite a thick muscular wall, because they carry around that blood that's full of oxygen, and therefore it's got more pressure in it, and that's why they need to be stronger, because there's more pressure in the blood when it's in the arteries. They have a thicker, more muscular wall. We then have veins, and the job of the veins is they take the deoxygenated blood, they take that back to the heart so that we can then pump it around to the lungs and get rid of that carbon dioxide. And the veins aren't as thick as the arteries, they're not as muscular. And what you'll be able to see, which we'll cover in a moment in a little bit more depth as well, is that the veins have something in them called valves. And the purpose of the valves is to stop the backflow of blood, because there's no pressure in this blood. It's more difficult to get it to flow in the correct direction, and therefore we have something called valves in the veins here that make sure that, I guess what I'm trying to say is make sure that the blood flows correctly, prevents the backflow of blood is the best way to say it, and that's why we have these little valves in the veins there. And then we have capillaries. So capillaries are the smallest of all the blood vessels, and arteries and veins lead to capillaries because capillaries are where gaseous exchange happens. And what that means is that is where the oxygen will exchange into the muscles, or the carbon dioxide will come into the capillaries to get out of the muscles. Alright? That's what capillaries do. They allow us to make gaseous exchange, and there's also lots of capillaries around the lungs as well, so that when we breathe in, we can get the oxygen into the bloodstream, and we can get the carbon dioxide out again through the lungs, and we can breathe it out. And that's the purpose of our capillaries. And to give you an idea, this is how it works. Blood goes out through those arteries. So this is the artery here, taking away that oxygenated blood, taking it away from the heart all around the blood, all around the body to where it needs to be. it transfers into capillaries at the bottom, and this is where the diffusion happens. So this is where that oxygen's getting sent into the muscles. At the same time, in the capillaries, the carbon dioxide is coming back in to the bloodstream through diffusion, and then the veins are bringing this deoxygenated blood back to the heart. And here's what we were talking about the veins, with them having valves, alright? And on the left you can see a fully functioning valve. It opens and closes to let blood flow at the right time. And then we have a varicose vein on the right, and a varicose vein is a vein where the valve isn't working correctly. And what that means, because the valve isn't working correctly, blood pools and it can't travel as effectively through the vein, and it gets stuck in there. And it needs things like you do need to be qualified to do this, but it needs like massage sometimes, or sometimes some sort of drugs can be helpful as well to thin the blood, to help it travel around the veins a little bit more easily. And that's why people get varicose veins. It's when the valves inside the vein aren't working correctly. And then just touching on that point again on blood pooling, it could be that you're doing a real intense workout and blood gets pooled in a certain area of the body. And what will happen if you're working with a client in that situation? They'll feel dizzy and faint. And what we need to do is we need to assist the return of the blood to the heart. So we need to get it out of that pooled area, get it back to the heart so it can be pumped around the body. We don't probably only recommend doing this if you have got a first aid qualification. Don't go diving in and doing it, but lying someone down on their back and lifting up their legs so that the blood flows through to the rest of the body is definitely something that would be valuable to do in that situation. It could really help someone to feel better and to prevent that blood pooling. Last thing we're going to look at is blood pressure. And blood pressure is a measure of force on the walls of the arteries as the blood flows through them. So someone's blood pressure is how much force is being pushed against an artery. Okay, that's what blood pressure is. We have systolic and we have diastolic blood pressure. Our systolic blood pressure is how much pressure is being exerted when the heart is pumping, and our diastolic blood pressure is how much pressure is being exerted in between beats, so when the heart is more relaxed. So systolic, when we're pushing and when our heart is actually pumping. Diastolic is in between heartbeats, so when the heart is at a rest. And then we also have total peripheral resistance, and that's the resistance blood vessels offer to blood. But right now we're concentrating on systolic and diastolic, and it's important as fitness professionals to know these measurements, because when someone comes in for an induction or to visit you for their first session and we take their blood pressure, we need to know what these measurements are, because if we don't, we can't then give accurate advice to our clients. We need to know what low and high and normal and good blood pressure is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit now. So low blood pressure is on the systolic, alright, so when the heart's beating, it's anywhere 100 or below, and 60 and below on the diastolic. So if you have a blood pressure which is 100 over 60, that would be low blood pressure. And if it is 100 over 60 or below, you'd really want to be referring to a medical specialist before you do any activity with that person, because they do have very low blood pressure. We have optimal blood pressure, which is 120 over 80. That's the perfect. That's what we're looking for. Okay, 120 over 80. That's an excellent reading just there. We then have normal blood pressure. So 130 over 185 would be normal. So this person, they're healthy. They've not got any sort of conditions. However, with a little bit of work in the gym and changing their diet slightly as well, we want to try and bring them down towards optimal, and that means they'll be in a better place to perform and they'll be a healthier person as well. So 130 over 185 is normal blood pressure. If someone was classed as maybe 125, 125 maybe over 183, they'd also fall into that normal bracket. So be aware, it's anywhere between 120 and 130, okay? We then have high normal or pre-hypertension, which is anywhere between 130 and 139, so 85 to 89, okay? That's pre-hypertension, and what that means is that the person who falls in that bracket, they're on the way to having high blood pressure. They're not quite there yet, but we do need to do something about it quite quickly to bring them back down. If they carry on the way they're going, they're going to find themselves in the hypertension area, and that's what we don't want. Okay, so be aware, pre-hypertension is not fantastic, it's not good at all. However, it can be rectified with exercise and diet. We then have stage 1 hypertension and stage 2 hypertension and stage 3 hypertension. Alright, so hyper, I think as we all probably know, hyper means high or higher, higher than normal. And these readings here are classed as high. And you can see next to stage 1 and stage 2 it says exercise referral. So people that fall into these brackets, so the 140 to 159, the 160 to 179 on the systolic, they're going to be people who have been referred by their doctor to do exercise because their blood pressure is too high. And if someone does come in to your facility or to work with you and they have a reading like this, you'll need to, and they haven't been referred by a doctor, you will need them to go to a doctor to get permission and to get advice and guidance before they begin any sort of program, because you could be at risk as a professional there. And then finally we've got the 180 or above to 110 and above. That is extremely high, okay? If someone comes in with those sort of readings, really you've got to refer them to a GP straight away. No exercise at all for those guys. You really need to find out what's going on. Do they need medication? Do they need to be admitted to a hospital? What is going on there? We need to look at that, because that is a very, very high blood pressure. So have a look through the readings. There is quite often a question on the exam about giving you a reading and then saying, is this low, optimal, high, whatever it might be. So make sure that we're aware of the different categories and also which readings fall into which categories. Exercise in the circulatory system, and we're just going to cover off the benefits of short and long term exercise to the circulatory system. So in the short term, so when we start exercising, the heart rate will increase. Our heart rate will beat more quickly, making it stronger and giving it some exercise. The stroke volume and cardiac output will increase. What that means is we're able to, every time the heart beats, we can move more blood around the body. That's what we mean by stroke volume and cardio output. Every time the heart beats, more blood gets moved out the body. We're working more efficiently, and we can get more oxygen into the muscles, and we can work more. If we're doing something like a sprint, we can run more quickly. If we're doing something like an endurance activity, we can work for longer. And also the capillaries dilate; they get bigger, ready for that gaseous transfer that we spoke about earlier. In the long term, the heart will become stronger, and our resting heart rate will be lower. So when we first start to exercise in the short term, if we go for a run, the heart rate will start going more quickly. In the long term, however, when we're resting, if we exercise regularly, when we rest, our heart rate is lower, so it doesn't have to work as hard to do the same job, which is very, very good, because if our heart doesn't have to work hard, it can work for longer, and it's likely to be healthier for a lot longer than someone's heart who has to work 10 to the dozen just to sort of keep that person alive. We then have improved stroke volume and cardio output, which is the same as what we mentioned in the short term. Lower working heart rate for the same effort. So let's say if I go on a bike ride, I'm quite keen on cycling, and if I go out on a bike ride and I haven't trained for 5 or 6 months, my heart's going to have to work quite hard to do a 15 or 20 mile cycle, okay? But once I've been training for, let's say I've been training for a period of 6 months, 2 or 3 times a week on the bike, I'll be able to do that same 20-mile bike ride, and my heart won't have to work as hard to do it because it becomes more conditioned. And that's what that means. My heart won't have to beat as fast or as to beat as many times. We have more mitochondria in the blood, and we have more capillaries, and we can also reach optimal blood pressure. So if someone does have high or slightly high blood pressure, through exercise and the correct diet, we can bring that blood pressure to the optimal amount. Hopefully, we've covered off all these areas today. We should know where the heart is. We should be able to describe the function of the heart and also what makes up the heart, the atrium, the ventricles, and also knowing those key blood vessels that flow into and out of the heart, the aorta, the vena cava, the pulmonary vein, and the pulmonary artery. We should know what all of those do. We should know about the systemic and pulmonary circulation. Remember, systemic is looking at the blood flow of the oxygenated blood. Pulmonary is looking after the deoxygenated blood and taking that back to the lungs to collect more oxygen. We know about the structure of the blood vessels in terms of the arteries have more muscle, the veins are slightly smaller but they do have valves in them. We know what blood pressure is, and we should be able to identify different blood pressures that are indicative of high or low or optimal blood pressure. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed watching. I hope you've made some good notes ready for your exam revision. Next presentation we're going to look at is on the respiratory system. So I will see you there, and thanks again for watching.